talked about the Iranian influence in Somalia and other countries, and talked about the Iranians providing support for improvised explosive devices in Iraq. And he said that in the case of Yemen and Saudi Arabia and Somalia, that the Iranians have had a very sinister hand in these places. So Erik Prince proposed that the U.S. send in forces, small forces of U.S. mercenaries, because he said that you're not going to solve the problem by putting a lot of uniformed soldiers in these countries. It's way too politically sensitive, he said. The private sector can operate there with a very, very, very small, very light footprint.
Again, let's go to that tape. This is Erik Prince.
The Iranians started up in Yemen first. They're trying to start up in the oil fields of Saudi Arabia. The Iranians have a very, very big hand in Iraq, certainly. And there's a lot of evidence that they're supporting the Taliban in Afghanistan as well. More and more sophisticated IEDs. They provide explosive devices that go on for troops on the road. Even some evidence of surface to missiles being moved in. So it's, the Iranians have a very sinister hand in these places in trying to, not going to solve it by putting a lot of uniformed soldiers in all these countries. Way too politically sensitive. Private sector can operate there with a very, very, very small, very light footprint.
Again, that was Erik Prince speaking in January. Difficult to hear. Jeremy, your article really goes through all of what he says throughout this speech. Talk about, well, go ahead.
And interestingly, he's speaking at the University of Michigan, where President Obama just gave the commencement address yesterday.
Right, and where he's going to be speaking on Wednesday in Holland, Michigan, is at the DeVos Fieldhouse, which is owned by the DeVos family, the owners of the Orlando Magic basketball team, the biggest bankrollers of the rise of the radical religious right. His sister, Betsy, is married to Dick DeVos, the heir to that fortune. And it's interesting because he almost always speaks at some kind of a venue there that's controlled by either his family or his extended family. The last part of what Prince said in that clip, though, is very significant. He talked about the issue of the very small footprint, and that's been his line for a long time, that the U.S. government has very expensive military operations, and that if you take a high-end team of Special Forces operators, like those that work for Blackwater, former SEALs, Delta Force, JSOC guys, Joint Special Operations Command guys, that you can send in less of them and that they can inflict much more damage. So he's suggesting that this would be something that could be done right now. Send them into these countries to take out the bad guys, as he called it. He constantly uses that term, the bad guys.
And other things that Prince talks about training Afghan forces, and also about Hurricane Katrina and Blackwater's presence there in the aftermath.
Right. He said that Blackwater trains somewhere in the ballpark of 1,500 Afghans every 6 weeks. And Blackwater is currently competing for this massive training contract to train the Afghan police. And there are some other companies do it. But Blackwater right now has a large part of the market cornered. And so they spend a lot of time with these Afghan forces. But he also sort of spoke disparagingly in a way that sort of was cultural imperialism about Afghans. You know, he said that the Afghans that come to us, you know, they've never been a part of something professional and something that works. And he said that you know, they don't know how to use toilets, and the first thing we have to do is teach them intro to toilet use. He also talks about women that are working with Blackwater, and he says, you know, they come to work in their burqas, and then they put on their camis, their camouflage. And he said, you know, they really like the baton work, and they get carried away with the handcuffs, wanting to handcuff men all the time. And you know, he was sort of speaking disparagingly of them, and then at the same time turns around and says, but in 6 weeks we turn these individuals into what U.S. generals have told me is the most effective fighting force in Afghanistan. You know, I wonder what General McChrystal thinks about that, given his Army Ranger history, that Afghans who spend 6 weeks with Erik Prince's force are somehow the most effective fighting force in Afghanistan. And then finally, Sharif, as you mentioned, Erik Prince brags that Blackwater saved 128 people during the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. I was down there, and we were all down there, Amy, and we saw the Blackwater guys. We talked to some of them. They said that they were there to confront criminals and stop looters. But what Prince says that I think would be offensive to Louisiana is he says that Blackwater forces beat the Louisiana National Guard to the scene of the hurricane zone. And he says, you know, we jumped from 5 states over and beat the Louisiana National Guard. He doesn't mention that 35 to 40% of the Louisiana National Guard was deployed in Iraq. along with massive amounts of equipment that could have been used in recovery operations, that could have been used in humanitarian operations there. So to say Blackwater beat the Louisiana National Guard without mentioning that part of the reason there wasn't an effective Louisiana National Guard response was because so many of them were in Iraq and deployed abroad. And they expressed anger. I remember seeing some of them coming back into Louisiana livid with President Bush, saying he cares more about Iraq than he does about Louisiana, and we should have been here. And so, you know, he uses that then to launch off, Amy, and say he participated, Prince as a SEAL, in the invasion, he called it, of Haiti in 1994. And then he said that he had wanted to create a humanitarian barge, like this massive vessel that could respond to natural disasters around the world, that could be supported by large pharmaceutical companies and Archer Daniels Midland, but that because of political attacks from the left, because of his tens of millions of dollars in legal bills, he had to cancel it. And he says, you know, a ship like that sure could come in handy right now in Haiti as it deals with the earthquake.
He also talked about the CIA bombing in Khost.
Yeah, he did, although he didn't mention the fact that Blackwater was guarding the CIA individuals that were blown up that day. Remember, there was a Jordanian double agent that managed to penetrate forward operating base Chapman, and he killed eight CIA personnel, including 2 Blackwater operatives. I have learned from a very well-informed intelligence source within the U.S. government that the Blackwater men were doing security that day. So, you know, in a way, you could say that the Blackwater operatives failed to protect the CIA individuals that were there that day. But Prince talked about it being a necessary cost of doing business, and that's when he segued into his disdain for the Geneva Convention, was when he started saying that the people that were fighting are barbarians that crawled out of the sewer. But he doesn't mention that Blackwater had personnel killed there. He also compares himself to Valerie Plame and says that he was a victim of outing, and that you know, the government depends on Americans who are not working officially with the government but are contractors for the entire intelligence apparatus to function, and it was unprecedented for someone like him running a sensitive program, which was essentially a CIA assassination program, to be outed publicly, and compared himself to Valerie Plame.
Jeremy, you're going to Holland, Michigan tomorrow. You're going to be speaking hours after Erik Prince.
Right. I mean, an interfaith congregation in Holland, Michigan, when they learned that Erik Prince was going to be speaking, and initially it was going to be completely closed off to any public scrutiny. I mean, what's the difference between closing it off to the public and not allowing journalists to record it or, in audio or video? And they said, you know, we as residents of this city are offended that this man is going to be speaking at what is supposed to be a sort of cultural celebration of the heritage of people there, and that they're going to shut it down essentially from any kind of coverage. So we want to bring someone in to give the other side of the story, because the organizers of the festival said that Prince was going to be talking about the value-based lessons of his childhood. Well, what about the values that Erik Prince's forces have shown in Iraq when they've shot innocent civilians and stolen childhoods, like Ali Kanani, the 9-year-old boy who was the youngest victim of Blackwater at Easter Square? We reported on that at Democracy Now! My intent is to go there and tell the other side of the story, the one that Erik Prince certainly won't be discussing inside the DeVos Fieldhouse.
And we will link to that story that you did tell about Ali Kanani at democracynow.org. Jeremy, thanks so much for being with us. Jeremy Scahill, independent journalist, Democracy Now! Correspondent, author of Blackwater, The Rise of the World's Most Powerful Mercenary Army, is starting a new blog at thenation.com where he writes about his acquiring this tape of a speech of Erik Prince, the founder of Blackwater. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. Back in a minute.